You've worked hard, you've done your duty, saved your pennies, and now it's time to think about retirement. But before you let loose, you may have critical questions. How can I pick the best plan for me? Where do I go for the right information? What are the tools to make my money grow? Strategy, information, solutions, and advice from qualified credentialed professionals. Joe Anderson and Al Clopine of Pure Financial Advisors have the answers to your retirement plan. This is your money, your wealth.
Well, we have a new president, folks. What is that going to do to your finances? Stick around. Over the next half an hour, we're going to break things down to make sure that you understand potentially what could happen to your wealth. This is probably one of the most important shows that we have done on Your Money or Wealth. So let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name's Joe Anderson. I'm a certified financial planner, president of Pure Financial Advisors. And of course, I am with the big man. That's Big Al. He's a CPA. Smartest guy in the room. There's only two of us in this room. When you look at taxes, okay, well, let's think about this. We haven't had major tax reform in over 30 years. We have a Republican president. We have a Republican House and Senate. So 2017, tax reform is almost certain. Are you prepared to make sure that you can do everything you can before December 31st? That's the financial focus today. So let's take a look. A couple of different things here with the Trump proposal. That's what we want to get into, of course. This is all hearsay. Nothing's in law. But when you take a look at what they're trying to do, they want to simplify the tax code. Right now, we have 7 different tax brackets. It goes to 10% all the way up to 39.6. What they're looking at doing from a marginal tax bracket federally is just breaking it down to 3. So that will simplify things, but is that good or bad? Because if you run the numbers, it's going to help out a lot of people immensely, and it could hurt other people. So when you think of lower taxes, of course you're thinking, hey, you know what, I'm going to pay less tax. But that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of planning that you want to make sure that you understand before you make any moves. That's why we're here, and that's why we had the big man, Big Al Clopine. Let's bring in the smartest CPA I've ever met in my life. Well, Al, it's been about 30 years since we had any type of major tax reform.
That's right, Tax Simplification Act. Easy for me to say.
Yeah, it made things pretty simple.
Yeah,
right?
It made it much more complicated.
So you look at, we have a Republican president, House and Senate, so tax reform might be pretty possible here in 2017.
Well, it might because, as you said, Joe, we've got a Republican president and a Republican-controlled Senate and Congress. But today, we want to talk about some year-end tax planning moves that you can make and should be considering, particularly in regard to some of the new proposals, which we'll get into as well. So one of the things that you're going to want to know how to do is reduce your capital gains tax. So that's right off the bat. And then, number 2, how to create tax-free income with Roth IRAs. How about charitable strategies? There's going to be a lot of good ones that you want to consider by the end of this year for numerous reasons, which we'll get into shortly. And then finally, generational asset transfers. So is that something you need to be considering right now, or maybe not with the new Trump proposals? And Joe, this is one of those things where we got a lot of content, so I guess we ought to just get right into it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you have to take a look at, right? What do you think? Good news, bad news?
Well, it's a little of everything.
It is a little of everything.
Like you said, Joe, and I think right off the bat, if we talk about capital gains taxes, let's see, what camera am I looking at? That one over there. Capital gains taxes.
Was this your first show?
Apparently. It's been a while, Joe. So is this. When you have an asset like a stock, bond, mutual fund, piece of real estate, and you hold it for at least a year and you sell it at a gain, you pay a special long-term capital gains rate. And right now that rate is 0% for some taxpayers, 15% for other taxpayers, 20% for others as well. Now, interestingly enough, right now, Trump wants to keep those rates the same. But what could be quite a bit different, Joe, is estate tax planning and the way capital gains will interact with estate taxes.
Right. You got to take a look. All right. So if I have an asset, a capital asset, so a mutual fund, a stock, bond, whatever, if I sell that asset at a gain, I pay a capital gains tax. Now, if I pass to the next generation, all right, so then there's this estate tax. Right now, you have to have an estate over about $5.5 million if you're single, double that up if you're married. Then it's a 40% tax rate, any dollar over that. The new proposal is that, all right, well, let's eliminate any type of estate tax whatsoever. So a lot of you are thinking, well, why are we talking about estate tax right out the bat? It's because a lot of you have capital assets, such as mutual fund stocks, bonds, real estate, and those assets, right, are taxed at a capital gains rate. Now, with the exemption of the estate tax, potentially the step up in tax basis on those capital assets might go away.
That's right, Joe. And so here's an example. Like if you inherit a home from your parents, let's say $1 million gain, and under current law, there is no tax because there's a step up in basis. The heirs get the asset at the current value that they received it at. So if they sell it, there's no gain or loss. Now, under the Trump proposal, it could be a full capital gain, which would be a $200,000 tax in that case. So there are some exemptions, Joe, that he is proposing. We'll have to see what happens. But the point I want to make is the reason why we have a step up in basis is because of these estate taxes. So if the estate tax goes away, there's not really a big reason to have the step up in taxes anymore.
Right, and let's just kind of reiterate what a step up in cost basis is. You purchase an asset for $100,000. It grows to $1 million, and then you pass away. Right, so then that heir receives that benefit, right? So that asset, and then their tax basis goes up to that $1 million. They could sell it the next day, zero tax due, as long as it's under that $5,400,000 whatever dollars or $11 million bucks if you are married, right? So it doesn't affect a lot of people. But if they eliminate the estate tax, potentially they could eliminate this step up in cost basis. So that's why looking at tax loss harvesting, tax gain harvesting, different types of strategies when it comes to your capital assets is going to be key. Al, tax loss harvesting is a key strategy that we talk quite a bit about, but I think it's still confusing to a lot of people.
Well, it is, and here's a real simple example of an asset or a stock, bond, mutual fund going down, and here, in this case, in the middle of 2012, that would actually be a good time to sell that asset and buy something similar, so you're still in the market. But when you sell it, what happens is you create a capital loss that you can use on your tax return against other capital gains. And that's not only useful this year, but it's going to be useful in future years, even under the Trump proposals.
Right, and then you have to take a look at tax gain harvesting because there's a 0% capital gains rate for people in the 10 and 15% tax bracket. So then it's like, all right, well here, maybe you want to chip some of this stuff off the table. You could sell an asset at a gain, pay zero tax, buy that same asset the next day or the same day, and then that just resets your tax basis. So there's a lot of different planning that you want to make sure that you take a look at. Don't go anywhere. We got to take a short break. When we get back, we're going to have a little roundtable discussion when it comes to different types of ideas, such as Roth IRAs, Roth conversions. Does it still make sense? What type of strategy should you take a look at there? We got Matt Horsley and Jack Dugan joining me, so you don't want to miss this. Show's called Your Money or Wealth. Good morning, everyone. Hey, welcome back to the show. Show's called Your Money or Wealth. Joe Anderson and Mr. Big Al Clopine hanging out here, talking about taxes, talking all about, we got a new president. I don't know if you guys know this or not. And maybe a little bit of tax reform coming down the pike and what you should do before year end, before it's too late. Before we dive into all of that good stuff, we have a roundtable coming up this segment, so you don't want to miss that. Let's go to what? The true-false question.
The stock market can predict if an incumbent party will win the presidential election. Wow, Joe, that's,
no, false.
However,
False.
I would say the last 10 elections, it was true 9 out of 10 times. Not this last time, though.
It's not predictive.
Check this out, though. Look at this. If the stock market goes down, the incumbent party loses. If the stock market goes up, they win, except for 1980. That was the only one time out of 10. Look at that, Joe.
In 2016.
The stats don't lie, except for this year. So how do you explain this year, Joe?
You know what? It's a little bit different, I guess, this year. There's a lot of weird things that happen.
Sure.
You never really know what can tell. So that's why you can't predict anything. When it comes to your money, right, you follow the charts and people try to predict things, and it usually ends up very badly. Who would have thought the market is where it's at right now? Because when everyone thought Hillary was going to win, what was going on with the market? It went up. And then when Donald came in, the futures blew up. It was down like 800 points. And then the next day, the market just keeps going up. So who would have thought that? No one. So that's why it's very difficult to predict anything. But what you can control is taxes. So that's what I want to get into. We have a roundtable discussion because I think it's very important because there could be some changes here and there's some things that I want you to look at before year end. We're big key components of something that's called tax diversification. It's controlling the things that you can't control, and taxes is one of them, as long as you understand how your investments are taxed. Because if you have investments, most of them will create a tax. And if you can reduce that tax, that means more money for you, less for the government. To help me out with this discussion, I want to introduce a couple of individuals. We have Jack Dugan. He's a certified financial planner. He is a senior investment advisor at Pure Financial Advisors. Jack, welcome.
Joe, good to be with you.
And then we have Matt Horsley. He's a senior investment advisor, certified financial planner as well at Pure Financial Advisors. I want to welcome you as well.
Thanks, Joe.
So when we look at investing and we look at creating income, all right, tax diversification, I think, is probably one of the key components that a lot of people don't necessarily take a look at. Because, I mean, look at these true-false questions. Predicting the markets, right? What's going to happen if a Republican's in, a Democratic's in? How am I going to make money? Well, the best way to make money is to pay less in taxes. Am I right or wrong here?
Absolutely.
1,000%. And here's one of the things that we absolutely preach to our clients is that there's lots of things that you can and cannot control. There's a million different ways to manage assets. But the one thing that we do know is at some point in the future, in particular with qualified money, with funds inside of your IRAs, 401ks, 457s, 403bs, when those funds come out in retirement, you're going to have to pay ordinary income taxes on that income when you pull it out. We'll talk more about, sort of diving into this in a second, but we do know one thing, is that the future of tax rates is uncertain.
Right.
We know what tax rates are today, and there's certain strategies that we'll talk about here in a few minutes that I think make a lot of sense for people going into 2017 that need to be implemented prior to the end of this year.
Well, I think there's the old talk of, hey, you will be in a lower tax bracket in retirement, right? And so, but the problem with that type of logic is where's most people's assets?
In their retirement plans.
Right.
It really comes down to, because what people are trying to do is generate income once they get into retirement. So instead of focusing on the value of what's inside of your account, now you start thinking about what's the purchasing power. Because depending upon what your tax rate is and what it's going to cost you to get it out of that account, now you got to say, how much money am I going to end up with?
Right.
That's the key thing. How much money do I end up with?
It's not necessarily what you earn, it's what you keep.
Exactly.
Right. And then so if you take a look at what we call kind of tax diversification, there's three different pools of money that you can invest in, right? You got tax-deferred money, which is the 401ks, IRAs that we just discussed. And then you have taxable money, which is taxed at a little bit lower rate, capital gains rate, right? So it's 0, 15, as high as 20. But I think one of the best pools, right, is looking at tax-free. The best gift the IRS has ever given us is the Roth IRA. And I think it's severely underutilized, it's misunderstood, and I think people really don't understand how to use this. And so when it comes to Roth planning, let's talk a little bit about this. So if I look at the proposals, right, it looks like, hey, maybe in some instances, some people will pay less tax. So does it even make sense anymore for certain individuals?
Well, I think that one thing is for certain is that in terms of looking at getting money into your Roth IRA, for yourself, for your family, in particular for your kids, if you're going to leave an inheritance, isn't the best way to leave money to your kids income tax free? And that's essentially what Roth IRAs are. Now, there's a couple of different ways to get money inside of your Roth IRA. There's Roth contributions and what's called a Roth conversion. So Roth contributions of the Roth came about back in the mid-1990s. It was only until 2010 that individuals could do what's called a Roth conversion. So contributions are taking money from your after-tax pool, cash you have, and to the typical maximum is $5,500. If you're over age 50, you can put in $6,500 into a Roth IRA. So that's a very small amount of money each year you can contribute. The real area where you can make a major impact on your retirement and your ability to generate income during retirement in a very tax-efficient manner is by doing Roth conversions. And that's by moving money from your IRAs, 401ks, 403bs into your Roth. But the caveat there, or the catch, is that once you do the conversion, right now you have to pay the tax.
Right, so you're paying tax today, and then now you have this pool of money that will forever grow tax-free.
And that's a key point, Joe, because a lot of these people, we're putting money into a Roth, and we're probably not going to need this money for 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Right.
Well, if I can get that money into a pool that's going to grow tax-free, I'm that much further ahead of the game as if I just left it into my IRA.
Right, so if you think of it like this, if I have $10,000 in my retirement account, it grows to $50,000. Every dollar that comes out of there is taxed at ordinary income rates.
Absolutely.
If I take $10,000 out, move it into a Roth, I pay tax on that 10 grand, but then that grows to $50,000. I pull the 50 grand out, 0% tax. And so when you're looking at pulling money from different pools on how they're taxed in retirement, I mean, people can potentially have very, very high incomes and pay very little tax. Right? And when do you need the money the most? It's in retirement. So if I have a pool of money that I can draw from and not necessarily worry about taxes, I mean, that's key. Another thing, too, coming up in first quarter of next year, which is on the docket, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, right? No one has a crystal ball, right? But when it comes to IRAs, right now, if someone passes away and it goes to a non-spouse, that non-spouse can stretch out the tax liability over their lifetime. So if it goes to a 5-year-old, let's say, and their life expectancy is age 85, they don't have to pay tax all in 1 year. They can stretch that tax out over 80 years. The stretch might be dead, folks,
Correct.
right? And so next year, if you inherit, a non-spouse inherits that retirement account, they might have to distribute that out within 5 years. Now, that could blow someone up significantly.
Sure, and here's one thing to consider as well, is that what the stats show is that especially for high net worth individuals that are leaving money to their beneficiaries, to their children, let's say somebody dies and they're 85 years old, their kids typically might be in their 50s, early 50s to mid or late 50s. They're likely in their top earning years of their career. So now you're leaving an asset that has not been taxed to these children who might be making even more money than you were, right, while you were working, subjecting them to even paying more tax. So the conversion to Roth makes the most sense, especially now with what may be coming down the pike.
Right, and I think it's just understanding where taxes are today, understanding where taxes are potentially going to go in the future, and make sure that you have a strategy in place to reduce those taxes. Fellas, I appreciate you taking some time. Let's go back over to Big Al and kind of wrap up this segment here.
Thanks, guys. I couldn't agree more. I think your Roth conversions, you still want to consider them even if tax law changes for numerous reasons. You may be in a lower bracket this year, the next year. This stretch IRA is another indication or another thing that might come up. You want to be considering conversions, and you got to do your conversions by December 31st. Something else you want to consider by December 31st is charitable contributions. Because what about this? What if Trump's proposals come true, and all of a sudden there's a much higher standard deduction and you don't get the benefit of your charitable donations? Well, this year might be a better year to make those donations, and there's a way to take future year contributions and deduct them in the current year. It's called a donor advised fund. You can actually give cash or appreciated stock or whatever it may be. You give it to this fund, you control the fund, you invest it how you want. Later on, whichever year you decide to give it to a charity of your choice, you can do that, but it's this year, it's the year that you put the money in the fund, in that charitable donor advised fund, that you actually get the tax deduction. It might be a big deal for a lot of you to be considering this. That also, like the Roth conversion, has to be done by December 31st. Now, so when you think about the donor advised fund, you can give cash. That's one way. You can give appreciated stock. That's even better, right? Because you get the donation for the value of the stock, but you don't pay the tax on the gain. So we are talking about this and many other strategies at our tax seminar coming up in San Diego on December 6th. We're also doing another one in Orange County on December 10th. It's a free seminar for anybody that wants to come, although I will tell you it will fill up quickly. There's a lot of changes that are coming about this year. You're going to want to be, or next year, you're going to want to be aware of what they are, and you want to be able to position your assets and your taxes appropriately to pay less taxes in the future. In our next segment, we're going to get into some other proposals that Trump has and see how that affects you.
Very
Stay
good job,
tuned.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Show's called Your Money, Your Wealth. Joe Anderson, Big Al, hanging out. Talking end-of-year tax planning moves. Tax reform could be right around the corner, so there's some certain things you want to make sure that you get done before the end of the year. We're going to wrap it up, but before we do that, let's go to the true-false question, shall we?
The stock market has better performance historically when Republicans are president. Interesting question, Joe, and I think at least in recent times, history would say not necessarily. And I think we even have a graph of that. I think you look at the last several, I think this is since Truman. I think the first year after a Democratic president got into office, it was about 9.7%. Under a new Republican president, it's 6.7%. So that's a little bit contrary to popular belief, but it's what we've seen in the last several elections.
Yeah, but if you go back even further, it's almost identical.
True.
And then you also have to take a look, all right, so 2008 was just recent, right? So from 2008, we had one of the, the Great Recession. And then from now, 2009 to 2016, 2017, the stock market is up, what, 250%, something like that, 200 plus. So you got to take some of this stuff with a grain of salt. The stock market is not Republican. The stock market is not Democratic. So it doesn't necessarily matter who's in president. It's all about stock pricing and capital and whatever. I'm not going to bore you. Hey, let's talk about taxes, shall we, Alan? There's a few different things, little meat on the bone when it comes to some tax reform potentially coming up. This is what we're talking about.
That's right. So here's some other proposals by Trump, which is repealing alternative minimum tax, which is a big one. I'll just go through these quickly and then we'll kind of dwell on them. Repeal of the Medicare surtax. That's that 3.8% surtax that you pay on unearned income when you're married over $250,000 of income, single $200,000 of income, and reducing corporate taxes. But Joe, let's start with alternative minimum taxes. Now, a lot of people don't realize this has been around since the 1950s. This is an alternative proposal, alternative way of paying taxes. There's the regular system and the alternative system, and whichever one is higher is the tax that you have to pay. Everyone needs to do that. The wealthy have not liked that tax because in many cases they end up paying a higher tax, but repealing alternative minimum tax will help those generally that make over, I would say, about $200,000 of income or more.
Right. I mean, each year, individuals have to file their taxes both ways. You have the marginal way, and then you have the alternative way, right? And then the alternative minimum tax. Once you fall into Altman, your effective rate goes to about 35%. So if they repeal that, that's potentially a lot of tax dollars that higher income individuals will definitely save.
Yeah, Joe, and that second one, that net income tax or net investment income tax. So that's that 3.8% tax that you have to pay with your dividends, with your capital gains, with your interest income, with your rental income, right? It's unearned income. You got to pay that extra 3.8% tax. Also on a capital gain, if you sell a property at a big gain, you pay that extra tax with that. So that would be repealed. In addition to that, there's an extra almost 1%, 0.9% tax that you pay on salaries. That would go away as well with this repeal.
Yeah, with that net investment income tax, that additional 3.8 is for taxpayers that have income of $200,000. For single taxpayer, $250,000 for a married couple. So again, those capital gain assets that are taxed at 15%, right now you tax at another 3.8% on top of that, and that net investment income tax could go away. Because I guess what the main initiative is to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And so that is helping pay for that. And the last one, Al, I think is key as well. When it comes to corporate taxes, this is going to affect a lot of corporations.
Well, that's exactly right, Joe, because the highest corporate tax rate for a C corporation is 35%. And Donald Trump would like to bring that down to 15%. And the idea is that there would be a lot less reason to take business to a foreign country. In other words, keep the business in the United States, keep the jobs in the United States, and so forth. So that's the thinking behind this. Now, the second part of that is if you have an S Corp or LLC, that flow-through income would also be taxed at 15%.
Right. And then so C Corps, right? So you're double taxed. So what happens is that you're like individuals or corporations, right? You're taxed at a corporate level. And then when those dividends go through, right, then they're taxed again at the individual level. And so what they're trying to do is reduce that corporate tax level just so that there's more wealth, this wealth effect. If we have more cash, then we invest it and so on and so forth. Same with smaller businesses with those flow-throughs as S Corps. So now that flow-through would then be taxed also at a lower rate, not at the ordinary income rates. So stay tuned. We have no idea what's going to happen. We're just here to educate you and let you know. By the way of education, we're having a tax planning workshop I want everyone to go to. It's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Big Al and I are going to get into the nitty-gritty of all of this. So we got this, December 6th in San Diego. It's at the Mission Valley Sheraton. Or in Orange County, it's on December 10th. You can go to puretaxclass.com to register, or you can go to yourmoneyyourwealth.com. Hey, I want to thank our roundtable. We had Jack Dugan and Matt Horsley. They did a wonderful job. Really appreciate them coming out and giving their perspective, what people should be doing in their overall taxes. And of course, Big Al breaking things down in a very simple manner, kind of, right? What do you think, Al? That's it for us today. We got to get the heck out of here.
Yeah.
I wish everyone a happy new year, right?
That's
and
right.
Hopefully you get some tax planning done now before it's too late. So we'll see you again next time.